as you will all know, particularly after my Birmingham video, I've been doing a lot of research on local councils, and I wanted you to sort of really get into the detail around this as well, because I think it's really interesting, and I think you will find it really interesting too. Before we start, please hit that follow button. It really helps the channel to grow and us to also grow as a community. So please like, subscribe, whatever you need to do, and leave comments would be really helpful. So local council, so if you think they're just about bins, potholes and planning applications, then you're missing the big story, because right now parts of the system are collapsing under the weight of mismanagement, failed oversight, and in some cases, dare I say, outright corruption. And I don't use that word lightly. I'm talking about documented failures, government interventions, and billions of pounds of public money lost through incompetence, reckless investment schemes, and governance cultures that simply weren't fit for purpose. This isn't about politics, this is structural failure, and the warning signs have been visible for years. So tonight I'm going to walk you through exactly how we got here, what the failures look like, and what must change if public services are going to survive into the next decade. Before we get into this, let me explain the lens that I'm looking through. So I've spent years working across corporate leadership, health, safety, security, compliance, assurance, and business improvement. When you've operated in environments where systems, people and governance have all had to line up, you start to recognise the early warning signs of organisational collapse long before the public even hears about it. I've seen what happens when leadership stops listening. I've seen what happens when risk assessments are ignored. I've seen what happens when a culture becomes so insular that the challenge is treated as disloyalty. And I've seen what happens when organisations gamble with money that they don't have, hoping that the future is going to bail them out. When I look at the failures inside English local government, I'm not looking at them as a political commentator. I'm looking at them as someone who has spent years dealing with governance, accountability, and operational discipline. And what I'm seeing is deeply concerning. Local government in England has experienced a pattern of collapse that can no longer be dismissed as coincidence. For years, the councils have warned about financial pressures, but what we're seeing now goes far beyond tight budgets. We're seeing structural breakdowns, we're seeing leadership failures, we're seeing governance systems that simply weren't designed to handle the scale of the risks that councils took on. And the evidence is overwhelming. Section 114 notices, which is the red card of local government, it's the closest thing that a council has to declaring bankruptcy. It means the council cannot balance its budget and must immediately freeze all non-essential spending. Historically, the notices were almost unheard of. Now they're becoming alarmingly common. Documented cases include Northamptonshire County Council in 2018, which was just catastrophic financial mismanagement. Croydon Council in 2021, failed property companies, 1.5 billion in debt. Slough Borough Council in 2021, which was borrowing and governance failures. Thurrock in 22, which was a solar farm investment. Woking Borough Council in 2023, which was 1.2 billion in debt from a failed property empire. And as I've covered on the other video, Birmingham, which had liabilities exceeding 760 million and a failed IT system. These aren't small councils, these are authorities that are collapsing under the governance of their own failures. The similarities are just impossible to ignore. So how have the failures happened? When you examine the councils that have collapsed, the patterns are almost identical. This is where my background really comes in, because when you've worked in environments where governance and risk management are non-negotiable, you start to see the same structural weaknesses repeating themselves. This isn't random, it's systematic. Reckless commercial investment. Some council borrowed hundreds of millions, even billions, to gamble on commercial ventures. These included hotels, shopping centres, office blocks, energy schemes, property companies. In the corporate world, if you're going to borrow that kind of money, you need robust due diligence, risk modelling, scenario planning, and independent challenge. But in several councils, those safeguards simply weren't there. Thurrock invested in solar farms based on completely misleading information. Woking borrowed over 1.2 billion for property schemes that just collapsed, and Croydon created a property company that lost tens of millions. These were investments, they were high risk bets made with public money, and the people making the decisions often lack the commercial expertise to understand the risks that they were taking. Weak governance and oversight. Audit reports repeatedly highlighted poor scrutiny, inadequate risk management, over-reliance on a small number of senior officers, lack of financial controls, failure to challenge unrealistic assumptions. In my experience, when it comes to organisation, where an organisation becomes dependent on a small number of decision makers without independent oversight, you're already halfway to collapse. And some councils operated like closed circles, a small group of senior people making huge financial decisions with minimal challenge from elected members who often didn't have the expertise to interrogate the details. That's not governance, it's a complete recipe for disaster. Cultural rot, this is the part that rarely gets discussed but is often the root cause. In several documented cases, staff were afraid to speak up, whistleblowers were completely ignored, and leadership dismissed warnings. Reports are buried, and councillors lack the expertise to challenge officers. I've seen this dynamic in failing organisations, a culture where challenge is treated as negativity, where bad news is completely suppressed, and where leaders surround themselves with people who tell them exactly what they want to hear. When that happens, failure becomes inevitable because the organisation stops learning, stops adapting, and stops seeing risk as something that needs to be concerned of. And political interference, so political pressure distorted decision making, rushed approvals, ignored risk assessments with over-ambitious regeneration schemes. Decisions were made for optics, not political outcomes. And when political ambition overrides the reality, then failure is going to happen. Many councils lack the qualified finance officers, experienced project managers, skilled procurement teams, strong internal audit functions. In the corporate world, you've never run a £1 billion organisation without the right expertise, yet some councils did exactly that. So not every council failure is corruption, but corruption thrives where governance is weak. And when you look at the documented cases, those vulnerabilities are really obvious. These aren't rumours, these aren't conspiracy theories, these are findings from auditors, inspectors and government appointed commissioners. And the pattern is always the same: weak controls and poor oversight, opportunity for abuse. The National Fraud Initiative, a warning ignored, was which identified that tens of millions of pounds in fraud every year across local government, and that's just what they're catching. The real numbers are almost certainly a lot higher than that, and they regularly uncover procurement fraud, payroll fraud, blue badge fraud, council tax fraud, duplicate payments, undeclared conflicts of interest. So from my experience in compliance and assurance in particular, fraud doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens when controls are weak, oversight's inconsistent, leadership's distractive, the culture's permissive, staff fear speaking up, and that's exactly the environment that some councils created. And the weakest link in the councils, you spend over 70 billion a year on procurement, and that's everything from construction contracts to IT systems to social care placements. And procurement is one of the highest risk areas for fraud in any organisation. Weak procurement controls create opportunities for inflated contracts, favouritism, undisclosed relationships, conflicts of interest, poor value for money, manipulated tender processes. In the corporate world, the procurement's tightly controlled because everyone knows it's just a magnet for fraudulent activity. But in some councils, procurement oversight was so weak that auditors described it as just not fit for purpose. When you combine that with inexperienced leadership and political pressure, you get a perfect storm. A few of the cases that I've seen while I've been doing the research is, as I mentioned, Thurrock Council invested hundreds of millions in solar farm schemes which were based on completely misleading information. The council borrowed heavily, trusted a single individual's claim and failed to conduct proper due diligence. When the investments collapsed, the council was left with catastrophic losses. Government commissioners were sent in, and the findings were just brutal: lack of scrutiny, poor financial controls, over-reliance on a single officer, failure to challenge assumptions. This wasn't bad luck, it was governance failure. And Croydon Council. So Croydon issued 2114 notices in 2 years. Auditors described the leadership culture as dysfunctional and highlighted collective corporate blindness. Their property company, brick by brick, lost tens of millions. Warnings were ignored, scrutiny was weak, financial controls were just completely inadequate. Again, not bad luck. A systematic failure of leadership. So Woking Borough Council borrowed over 1.2 billion, that's billion, for property investments that collapsed. The government described the financial situation as unprecedented. Commissioners found excessive risk-taking, lack of expertise, poor governance over ambitious projects, inadequate oversight. It wasn't a small mistake, it was a council acting like a hedge fund without the skills, controls or risk management to match. In Birmingham, the largest local authority in Europe, issued a Section 114 notice after equal pay liabilities spiralled out of control, 760 million, and add to that the failed Oracle IT system costing tens of millions, and you have a council overwhelmed by its own failures. It wasn't a sudden crisis, it was years of unresolved issues, ignored warnings and leadership paralysis. And the human impact, it's easy to talk about billions of pounds and governance failures, but behind every collapse is a human cost, and this is where the story becomes more than numbers, because when councils fail, people suffer. This isn't abstract, this isn't theoretical, it hits real people, real communities every single day. Social care at breaking point, it's already stretched to its limits. When councils collapse, that pressure becomes unbearable. Vulnerable adults wait long for assessments, care packages are delayed or reduced, families are left to cope alone. Providers struggle to stay afloat. Social care it's not optional, it's a lifeline, and when councils fail, that lifeline phrase. Children's services, so they're always one of the most expensive and complex areas of local government. When budgets collapse, caseloads rise, early intervention disappears, and instead of preventative measures, the reactive. Children end up in crisis, and once a child enters the system, the costs, financial and human, escalate rapidly. Homelessness, rising demand, falling capacity. Councils have a legal duty to provide temporary accommodation, but when finances collapse, they struggle to meet the demand. More families in hotels, longer stays in temporary accommodation, reduced support. Homelessness isn't just a housing issue, it's a symptom of a system under extreme pressure. And roads, transport and infrastructure. England already has 16 billion in road repairs, a backlog of road repairs. Maintenance slows in these situations, road safety declines, public transport suffers, potholes, infrastructure projects stall. These aren't luxuries, they're essential for daily life. And environmental health, they're quiet but quite critical. Environmental health teams handle food safety inspections, housing enforcement, pollution control, public health risks. When the budgets collapse, these services slow down and their risks increase. Libraries, leisure centres, community hubs, these are often some of the first to go as well. Libraries have to close or reduce hours, leisure centres can struggle, youth services disappear, community hubs shut down. These spaces aren't just buildings, they're the heart of a community. And the staff, the silent casualties. When a council collapses, the experienced staff leave, morale plummets, workloads increase, services deteriorating further due to that. It's incredibly hard to rebuild once you've lost it. And the final loss, when the councils fail, the residents lose trust, and once that trust is gone, it's impossible to restore. People stop believing that the system works, they stop engaging, they stop expecting any improvements, and that's the most dangerous outcome of all. So what needs to change? So if we want to stop the next wave of collapse, we need structural reform. And this is where, again, I'll rely on my background, because the solutions aren't theoretical, they're operational, they're practical. They're the same principles that keep high-risk industries functioning safely and efficiently, and they do it every day. Local government doesn't need a miracle. It needs competence, it needs accountability, it needs a system that works. So breaking it down, so professionalised leadership, councils need leaders with financial competence, risk management understanding, operational discipline, accountability culture. Too many councils have been led by individuals who didn't have the expertise to manage £1 billion budgets or complex commercial ventures. Leadership roles in local government should be treated with the same seriousness as senior roles in major corporations, because the stakes are just as high, if not higher. And stronger governance. So governance isn't just about paperwork, it's protection. Councils need independent audit committees, mandatory training for councillors, transparent reporting, real-time financial dashboards, clear lines of accountability. If a council's borrowing hundreds of millions of pounds, there should be multiple layers of scrutiny, not a rubber stamp exercise. And procurement reform. So this is where the money flows and the risk associated with it. It must include mandatory conflict of interest declarations, stronger contract management, better due diligence, external oversight on high-risk projects, and a clear separation between political influence and procurement decisions. If they're spending 70 billion a year, the systems managing that money must be watertight, and a cultural reset. So this is the hardest part, but the councils need to protect whistleblowers, encourage challenge, and end the culture of silence, reward transparency, and promote psychological safety. So a healthy organisation is one where people can speak up without fear. A failing organisation is one where silence is the norm. Right now, too many councils fall into that category. And the government must intervene early, not after the collapse. That means clearer financial rules, limits on borrowing for commercial investments, mandatory reporting for high-risk ventures, stronger intervention powers, and a national standard for governance and risk management. If councils are going to operate like commercial entities, they need commercial-grade oversight. So in conclusion, local councils are they're essential. They're the backbone of daily life. They keep communities functioning. They protect vulnerable people, maintain infrastructure, and deliver services most residents never even think about until they actually stop working. But parts of the system are failing, not because of bad luck, because of weak governance, poor oversight, and leadership cultures that allow risk to grow unchecked. This isn't about the politics, this is about the competence of the people, this is about accountability, this is about protecting public money and public services. If we want local government to survive the next decade, we need honesty about what went wrong and the courage to fix it. A system that cannot protect itself cannot protect the people it serves. This is absolutely necessary, and we need to change that. So please highlight anything that you see that is related to this. Please put it in the comments. What are your thoughts? Do you have a completely different view? Do you have an understanding that perhaps I don't or others don't from inside information? Please like, follow and subscribe to the channel. I want to really build a community and help people be informed, cut through the controls that we have around mainstream media, and just give people the complete and honest truth as I find it. So thank you again, and thank you for watching the channel. This has been Britain the Corporation. Good night.